So Diddy is facing a number of assault allegations, and now Netflix is going to be making a documentary on this turmoil that is surrounding him. But here's the thing. That documentary is going to be produced by 50 Cent, someone who's had beef with Diddy for a long time. Today on the podcast, who can be trusted to tell the Diddy story? I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, listen, before we dive in, I just wanted to say this story, I think, can be difficult for some folks. So if this is not for you, I totally and completely understand. Look, over the past few months, Sean Combs, who you better know as Diddy or P. Diddy, has been drowning in legal turmoil. There have been allegations of trafficking, of sexual abuse, of verbal abuse. And now it's been reported that Netflix has bought the rights to an upcoming documentary about Diddy, and the man behind that doc is none other than 50 Cent. Here with the reaction to all of this, Jay Connor is here making his Commotion debut. Tayo Barrow is here. Tayo, Jay, welcome to Commotion.
What up, what up, what
Hey,
up?
Elamin.
Hello. Listen, Jay, I'm going to start with you. What was your initial reaction to the news that 50 Cent is going to be releasing a documentary about these allegations against Diddy?
Honestly, with 50 Cent being the king of trolls, I thought he was just playing. Like I thought he was just like, messing with Diddy like he's been doing for years. But when I actually saw that the deal went through with Netflix, I was like, oh wow, like this is actually something legit.
Yeah.
And it just proves just exactly how petty this man is. You know what I mean? Like nothing will stop him from trolling somebody. Nothing will stop him from furthering his agenda. So, I mean, it's right on brand, but if anything, he's somebody who has proven himself capable of doing this.
You know what I love, Jay, is that we are 30 seconds into the show and you've already called 50 the king of trolls. I think
Yeah.
there's something to be said about his trolling persona that he adopts online. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But Ty, maybe I'll get your reaction. What was your reaction when you first heard, you know what? It's going to be 50 Cent who's producing this documentary about Diddy.
I was immediately annoyed because, like Jay said, 50 Cent is the king of trolls. But this is nothing to joke about. This is nothing to make fun of. This is nothing to poke fun at. I'm also, now that I know that Netflix is involved in the conversation, I'm also a little bit curious about exactly what's going to be in it, and just how well made this is going to be. So now I'm kind of curious.
We'll come back to this documentary in just a moment, but I think people listening may need a bit more of the details of the story. Jay, you've referenced the fact that 50 has been trolling people online for some time. Maybe we should explain to people the background of how 50 has been trolling Diddy specifically, because that's been a thing that's been happening for years. So what's the backstory there?
Yeah, it's funny, with us being in this industry that, we understand that a lot of these relationships are rooted in, leveraging your proximity to somebody for personal gain. So I don't think these two have ever been like necessarily like boys. I think they just both came to an understanding that it was mutually beneficial for them to be associated with each other. But that said, 50 has been taking digs at Diddy for years, from calling him fruity to, dragging Ciroc, talking about like it's not real vodka, it's made from grapes, because of his own brand, effing.
Yeah.
But I think this beef took another turn from just simply trolling to something more maybe insidious in nature, was when 50 found out that Diddy was romantically interested. I mean, romantically involved with 50's child's mother, Daphne Joy.
Hmm.
And that revelation came out around 2021. So I think that's when things took a different turn and it became a little bit more, like I said, nasty. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he's just, so for all this to come out, and then with the lawsuit, by I think the guy's name was Lil Rod Jones, the producer that
Yep.
also filed a lawsuit against Diddy. In that lawsuit, Daphne was named as a quote unquote sex worker
Hmm.
in that. So once 50 got a hold of that information, obviously he went on social media and started calling his own child's mom a little sex worker, and just being even more relentless with the beef. So I think it definitely started as something that was initially competitive, and sadly, it's
Morphed
turned
into
into something that's
something.
way more, personal.
I have such a deep distaste for 50s trolling. I have not particularly found it entertaining, but like it's something that sort of has drawn a lot of attention and crowd to him, has only built his notoriety and reputation. I want to come back to that again in just a moment, but 50 Tayo has been teasing this Diddy doc for almost a year, and then Netflix has reportedly bought the rights after a bidding war. So it wasn't just kind of like, hey, go straight to Netflix and they buy this thing. There was a bit of a competition. What do you make of the fact that a lot of networks were trying to figure out how to tell the story?
I think for me, that comes together. Like there's a couple of things happening here. So if we think back to a few years ago when the R. Kelly documentary first came out,
Yeah.
that was like a really big cultural moment, right? Like it got everyone talking about the story, and it really broke open, I think, a conversation that had been kind of in the shadows for a very long time.
Yeah.
And so in the years since, I think what we've seen is this kind of documenting in some kind of way all of these, any kind of story that has to do with like a sex scandal or a sex abuse scandal in Hollywood, and having a documentary made is kind of like the steps that we see now every time. So we saw it with R. Kelly. There was one about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. The Nick and Aaron Carter one, I think, is going to be coming out soon.
Yeah.
So there's just definitely, we're in a cultural moment with that. And I think also there's just culturally, again, like we're in this moment of true crimifying everything. And I think that's also what we're seeing with the way that 50 Cent has been talking about this documentary and marketing it. And a lot of the trolling is like, this is going to be like this scary true crime story that we're going to get. And that's a thing that is very interesting to people right now. So I think the combination of those two things coming together in this moment is what's made it so, a project like this so attractive.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to separate two things out, Jay. There's 50 the Troll, right? Which is to say, a lot of 50 Cent's social media presence is poking fun at people, saying provocative things just to get a reaction. He's been doing this for years. I'm like, make a rap album, man. Like, do something with your life that isn't this, because the only thing that he's been sort of known for the last few years has been this trolling. But he's also made some television, right? So his production company made the show. He's executive producer of the hit franchise Power, and then a documentary entering the fray. The idea that 50's production company, makers of Power, are also going to make this documentary. That's a different beast. So how confident are you that 50's going to be able to separate the trolling side, the social media thing that he does, from a production company that does a well-produced and much-needed documentary about the Diddy allegations? Do you feel confident that 50 can take that on?
I think it's a very fair question to ask because, like you said, we're talking about the person versus the business. You know what I'm saying? And I think from a professional standpoint, he's proven himself capable of taking this on as an executive producer. We know that in Hollywood, being an executive producer is kind of a nebulous term. It might mean you're actually overseeing something. It might mean you just cut a check. You know what I mean? So you don't really know his level of involvement. But that being said, in functioning as an executive producer, he's given us comedies with 50 Central at BET. He's given us dramas with For Life at ABC. And obviously, he's overseeing the entire, what I like to call, Star Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
But I think that people are also forgetting that he was behind Hip Hop Homicide with my guy, Van Lathan.
Yes.
And he also put out the BMF doc, Blowing Money Fast, which I was actually really impressed with. So he does have a track record that is, diverse as far as, comedy, dramas, and also documentaries. My concern is that with the personal component in regards to Diddy's relationship with the mother of his son, if he's able to separate the two.
Yeah, this becomes a question. Also, I should point out at this point, Diddy himself has denied all the allegations against him. His lawyers have described the lawsuits as money grabs and, quote, baseless. Tayo, when you look at 50's involvement with all this and his involvement in the doc and also his reputation for being this troll, do you think there's a risk here that we overshadow the actual serious issues at play in the story?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that it happened the second 50 Cent opened his mouth and got
You think it's
involved in
already
this
happened?
conversation. It's already happening. And unfortunately, it's giving me flashbacks to the moment we had with Megan Thee Stallion, where it took us so long to, as a society, get to the point of understanding this is not a joke. Like, people's lives have been destroyed as a result of the things that are being alleged, and that's nothing to joke about. But ultimately, I think what this is going to turn into is a pissing match between two powerful men, instead of us thinking about, like, how do we as a society produce a Diddy, and how do we get to this point where we see all of these harms taking place.
I mean, that's the question that we need answered, is how do we as a society produce a Diddy, and how do you sort of end up enabling a person like that? I'm glad that you brought up the Megan Thee Stallion example, because that story, the story of Tory Lanez, when she said, "Hey, I was shot in the feet by Tory Lanez," for an extended number of months, that story was treated like a little bit of a joke in a lot of hip hop media, and that was really frustrating, until eventually Tory Lanez was convicted of this, and it took too long for a lot of hip hop media to come around and actually treat that story with the seriousness that it deserved. Having said that, Jay, do you think the doc, or this approach to the doc from someone like 50 Cent, has what it takes to change the culture of enablement that Ty was talking about there, that we've seen sort of entrenched in the music industry?
Ooh, I think it has the capacity to. I mean, for me, it comes, like we said earlier, it comes down to whether, 50 is going to take this seriously.
Yeah.
Because, like, even in some of his trolling, he has had some of his posts at least have been serious.
Yeah.
But then he goes back to the nonsense that you're just kind of like, I don't know what I'm getting. So I think it really depends on if he's going to take this on seriously. Like, if he's really going to adjust the culture of, what goes on in the music industry or the entertainment industry at large, as far as a lot of, inappropriate behavior that comes at the, expense and agency of women, and especially Black women.
Yeah.
Or is he going to, turn it into a troll fest? You know what I mean? And I think the root of the matter is it really also depends on who else is going to be involved in the project. Because I think in certain instances, you have to hire people that are going to, keep things in line, but also hire people that are going to know when to acknowledge your input and when to push it aside. So I guess we'll find out. And I guess, Netflix definitely has a track record for producing a lot of documentaries to various degrees of success and accolades. But I think it really depends on who else is going to be a part of the project.
Tayo, I take seriously the point that you said earlier, the idea that, these documentaries sort of have an opportunity and to really shift the culture, because what they can do is sort of distill the story of a person by answering a really big question for us. A well-produced documentary can really shift how we think about a particular individual. My take on this is I'm a little bit comforted by the fact that Netflix probably wouldn't expose themselves to the criticism of making a documentary that is just simply a hit job. Am I too naive in that? Am I too naive, and should I actually just be worried that this documentary is being made at all, do you think?
No, I don't think you're too naive. I think there is something to be said, and there is some hope in the fact that this is going to be a Netflix production. So we can put our hope in that. And to Jay's point earlier, I don't think anybody denies the fact that 50 Cent has the resources, the experience, and the structures around him to make a good documentary and to add, to contribute to this conversation. I think what we need to be looking at is the spirit in which this conversation is being had and the way that it's being talked about and the intention behind why we're making this documentary. 50 Cent isn't an advocate for women who have been victims of abuse. He was just last year defending Bill Cosby, right? So you're not the guy who is going to lead the conversation about things that need to change as far as, power structures and harm that's being done to women. But at the end of the day, what we can hope, I guess, is that we're having the conversation anyway, and that this will be one big piece that contributes to that larger picture.
Well, you guys bet we will be having that conversation whenever we get that 50 Cent Netflix documentary. Whenever it drops, we'll be there. Jay Conner, Tayo Barrow, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Jay Conner is a culture critic and senior editor at The Root. He was in Los Angeles. Tayo Barrow is a columnist at The Guardian. She was in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm Alamin Abdul Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Listen, it's been 5 years since Netflix premiered Kingdom, which was its first original drama from Korea. Kingdom is a wildly popular zombie horror series, and it became the first of a number of global hits that Netflix produced in Korea. Later, we got K dramas like Crash Landing on You, Sweet Home, Squid Game, The Glory, and so many more that regularly, almost every week, make their top 10 of the week. Netflix reportedly plans to invest over $2.5 billion into Korea over the next just 4 years, and other streamers are following suit, making their original K dramas as well. This has all dramatically changed Korean TV and Korea's TV industry in ways that people didn't really see coming. Regina Kim has been watching this unfold, and she wrote a really fascinating piece for HuffPost about this. Regina, thanks for coming back to Commotion. How are you?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for coming back. Listen, Regina, Netflix opened its office in Korea in 2016. Back then, people in the Korean entertainment industry didn't expect it to survive. Why were the odds stacked against them at the time, and how did they overcome those odds?
Yeah, so the simple answer is that Netflix just did not have any name recognition when it launched in Korea. I mean, even people working in the Korean entertainment industry had not heard of Netflix at the time.
Oh, wow.
And so the TV networks that created most of the K-dramas back then didn't really see any reason to license their content to some unknown foreign company. And so in the beginning, like no one in Korea took Netflix seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I will say that, like, I think one of the things that I think Netflix did right from the very beginning was it built a team of Koreans who were industry or like entertainment industry veterans.
Yeah.
And this team, like they really understood the local market. And one of the ideas that they had early on was that, they knew that there was a lot of content that just could not be shown on broadcast TV because
Right.
in Korea, there are these, guidelines around what can and cannot be shown on TV. So for example, no sex, no excessive violence. And so Netflix started getting scripts that were literally discarded by Korean broadcasters because a lot of the content was too graphic for TV.
Right.
And so Netflix like really started, differentiating itself by really leaning heavily into this like graphic, edgy content that could not be shown on TV. And so that's how we got the zombie K-drama Kingdom, because that became Netflix's first original Korean series. And the writer of that drama, she had been pitching that script for like 5 years, and she kept getting rejected by
Oh, wow.
broadcasters because they were telling her that it was way too graphic. And then Netflix eventually bought it, and it became a global hit. And then 2 years later, we have Squid Game, and the rest is history.
Squid Game, famously one of the most gory shows that you've seen on television recently, or like on Netflix anywhere recently. Although I guess people are like, no, it gets much gorier, much gorier.
I do not think Squid Game
maybe
is
I'm
that
just
gory.
the faint of heart, to be honest with you. That's a lot of blood. That's a lot of blood, Regina. I have to
People
say,
should watch A Bloody Lucky Day on Paramount Plus. Like, that is gory. That is graphic.
should I watch that? It sounds like I'm not going to be able to actually get through it. But listen, I'm curious about this because if the idea here is that like K-drama fans have an expectation that it's not going to be that graphic, that it's not going to be, that sexual in terms of watching it. And then suddenly Netflix comes in and says, guess what? Some of those rules, they're changing. How does that sit with fans that, have loved K-dramas for a long time?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think if we're talking about longtime K-drama fans, and like there are fans in the US who have been watching K-dramas for like almost 30 years, believe it or not.
Sure.
Yeah. And so like I talked to some of them, and the sense that I got from just these conversations was that, many of them felt like they were, seeing more and more K-dramas with very graphic, very violent content because of Netflix and also because of Disney Plus. And many of them said that they initially got interested in K-dramas because they found K-dramas to be very different from Western shows. Like K-dramas generally avoided showing sex or violence or nudity, and so they found K-dramas to be very wholesome, very refreshing, and overall very family friendly. But now they're saying that they feel like these K-dramas are quote unquote changing. And actually it was their complaints, because if you go online on, boards or on forums like Reddit, for instance, you'll see tons and tons of posts by K-drama fans complaining about K-dramas that are becoming more violent. And so I wanted to kind of look into this more. And that's actually what really inspired me to write this HuffPost piece in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious about the frustration that within the Korean TV industry that Netflix has gotten maybe a little bit too big. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I'm really fascinated by this dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, I think the funny thing is like, Netflix is this company that like literally every Korean person in the entertainment industry kind of looked down on just like 7 or 8 years ago.
Sure.
And now it's become like this behemoth that everyone's kind of forced to work with. But nowadays, everyone is flocking to Netflix because they know that Netflix is going to give them a relatively huge production budget and also lots of creative freedom.
Mm.
And B, they know that Netflix has global reach. And so once their show is released on Netflix, they know that millions of people are going to watch it, even if the show isn't very good. But because Netflix just pours so much money into their projects, they've really driven up production costs for K-dramas in general.
Wow.
And so now you're seeing like Korean broadcasters, cable TV networks, local streaming services, they're all struggling to compete with Netflix. And actually, many of them are releasing fewer K-dramas because K-dramas are just getting so expensive to make. And so that means like the number of distribution channels outside of Netflix is shrinking.
The idea of them pouring $2.5 billion in just 4 years, I mean, that's an overwhelming amount of money. But can I just ask you, in your piece, you quote a veteran Korean film producer named Jonathan Kim, and he said, "We Koreans in the film industry do not consider Netflix original series as a K-drama," but he meant that in a positive way. What was he talking about when he framed it like that?
Yeah, so he was basically saying that Korean shows on Netflix are closer to Korean movies than to K-dramas. And
Ah,
yeah, and so like for example, one reason he gave was that unlike Korean TV, Korean movies generally don't have any restrictions around content. And so if you look at the history of Korean cinema, there are so many Korean films that are like really dark and twisted. I mean, Old Boy is a good example that I can
yes,
think of.
of course.
Yeah, and like the subject matter in general is just so much more diverse than what you see in TV. And so, in that sense, you could say that Netflix original Korean series are much closer to Korean films than to traditional K dramas. Another reason is that Netflix K dramas tend to be a lot shorter too. So like
Yeah.
usually they run about like somewhere between 6 and 12 episodes, whereas like the more traditional K dramas have like 16 plus episodes.
I
And I was saying like that.
Go
Oh
ahead.
yeah, go
No,
ahead.
no, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, like, the third reason that he gave was that, there used to be this divide between Korean film and Korean TV, mostly because of their production processes. Like, the
Yeah.
processes were so different. Because, like, in the past, Korean dramas were often aired the same week that they were filmed. And that meant, sometimes the episodes had to be edited while they were being broadcast. Like, it was a crazy pace that Korean film directors could not keep up with. Like, it
Yeah.
took a certain person to be able to, like film that fast.
Yeah.
But with Netflix, you have to film everything in advance. And so that really opened up opportunities for Korean film directors to venture into TV.
It feels like, Regina, it feels like an understatement to say that Korean entertainment has become a global force. But also, there's something about the timing. There's something about the timing that Netflix hopped on the bandwagon, because it kind of feels like they hopped in at the exact right moment to sort of ride this rocket. Is that fair to say, would you say?
I mean, I would say yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, like Netflix did hop on the bandwagon at the right time because I would say that K dramas have been popular in many parts of the world for decades now.
Mm-hmm.
I think Western media, likes to treat K dramas as if there's some new phenomenon, but like K dramas have been like extremely popular in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Middle East for many years now. And even in the US, like back in 2014, there was even a study that showed that in 2014, about 18 million Americans were already watching K-dramas at the time.
Mm.
So you already had this like sizable built-in audience for K-dramas around the world. And so Netflix did kind of swoop in at the right time. But, I will say that to Netflix's credit, like I think where Netflix really made a big difference was that it introduced K-dramas to audiences who previously did not know
Right.
or care about, K-dramas.
Right.
And I think Netflix really brought K-dramas into mainstream conversations. And, now we're seeing like mainstream media outlets in the US or like in the West covering K-dramas on Netflix, which you just did not see like 5 years ago. And so Netflix has really normalized having conversations about K-dramas, I would say.
I got to tell you, Regina, I'm going to be sitting with the idea that Squid Game is not that gory for the rest of the day. But in the meantime, I appreciate you being here. Thank you for your
The
time.
violence is kind of cartoonish. I don't know if you noticed. But
No,
it's
because
not
I was
very
too busy
realistic.
hiding my face. But again, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you for having me.
Of course. Regina Kim is a freelance writer and newly named Forbes contributor based in New York. You can read her piece on the Korean television industry over at Huffington Post. That is it for the show. My name is Alameen Abdul Mahmood. This show is called Commotion, and I'll see you tomorrow.